The Yowie Finds a Home. It seemed to the Yowie that the whole world had turned gray. Wisps of damp gray mist were creeping up the mountainside. Ghostly gray gum trees stretched their branches to a watery gray sky, and over it all fell a cold gray drizzle of rain. "Winter's coming," cackled the kookaburra from his perch on an old tree. "What's so funny about that?" asked the Yowie as he huddled under a rock, trying to keep himself dry. "You have to look on the bright side," chortled Kookaburra. The Yowie couldn't quite see the bright side of sitting in a puddle with cold water dripping down his back and the wind whistling through his whiskers. However, he decided that a little Yowie song might help, so in his cheeriest voice he began to sing. "Ho, let's all sing about rain and sleet and mud and slush that sticks to our feet. When the winds are cold and the air is foggy, the sky is gray and the ground is soggy. When days are short and the nights are long, let's sing a winter song. Ho, let's sing a song about snuffles and sneezes, influenza, coughs and wheezes, a cold in the head, a sniffly nose, chilblains on all our fingers and toes. We'll all have pneumonia before too long, so let's sing a winter song." Said Kookaburra as the last of the Yowie song rumbled away down the valley. "Is that what you call looking on the bright side?" "There isn't a bright side," answered the Yowie gloomily. "I'm cold and wet and I've nowhere to go." "Then go home," chuckled Kookaburra. "Home is the best place to be on a day like this." "Home?" asked Yowie. "Where's that?" Kookaburra gave a squawk. "You don't know where your home is?" "Me oh my, you must be joking." He laughed so loudly that Wombat came shuffling out of the wet bushes to see what all the noise was about. The Yowie liked Wombat. He wasn't very clever, but he always tried to make up for it by being helpful. "Hello," said Wombat. "Did someone make a joke?" Kookaburra gave another whoop of laughter. "The Yowie says he doesn't know where his home is." Wombat's bright little eyes filled with sympathy. "That's not funny," he said. "That's very sad. But don't worry, Yowie. We'll soon find your home. What does it look like?" "I've no idea," confessed the Yowie. "I've never seen it." Kookaburra laughed so hard he almost fell over. "It's not funny," said Wombat again. "If poor Yowie doesn't have a home, then we must find him one." "That would be very nice," said the Yowie gratefully. "Nothing to it," said Kookaburra. "All you need is a hole in a tree trunk. Why, there's one in that old gum tree over there." He fluttered over to the gum tree and poked his head into a large hole in its trunk. "Beautiful!" he boomed, his voice all deep and echoey from inside the hole. "Just the spot for a Yowie." The Yowie crawled out from under the rock. He was very stiff and creaky from crouching for so long, and he couldn't wait to be snug and warm in his very own nest in a tree trunk. But when he took a close look at the hole, his heart sank. "I'll never fit in there," he cried. "There you go again," said Kookaburra, "always looking on the dark side." Wombat was so eager to help that he forgot that he wasn't clever and actually had an idea. "What we have to do," he said, "is fold him up like a piece of paper and post him through the hole." He was so excited by his very first idea that the Yowie didn't have the heart to tell him that it might not work. 5 minutes later, when Mrs. Wombat came to call her husband home to tea, a most astonishing sight met her eyes. Something huge and hairy was lying in the mud. Its feet had been pulled out over its shoulders and tucked behind its ears. Its arms were neatly folded across the backs of its knees, and Wombat was doing his best to push its head down towards its tummy button. Kookaburra sat on a branch overhead, laughing hysterically. "Wombat, dear," said Mrs. Wombat, "what are you doing?" "I'm folding up the Yowie," explained Wombat. "Poor Yowie hasn't got a home, and if we can make him small enough, we're going to pop him into this hole." "But perhaps the Yowie doesn't like being folded up," suggested Mrs. Wombat gently. "Perhaps he'd rather live in a burrow, like we do." The Yowie said in a wheezy, gurgly voice that he thought perhaps he would. Wombat was disappointed that his idea hadn't worked. With a sigh, he began to unfold the Yowie. Kookaburra just sat on his branch going, "Ha ha, tee-hee," which was rather irritating. Mrs. Wombat, who seemed to have taken charge of things, said that the Yowie would have to be measured for his burrow. So they straightened him out on the ground, and Kookaburra drew a line round him with his beak. It was then that Mrs. Wombat had her idea. "I really think, Wombat dear," she said, "that instead of putting the Yowie under the ground, we should put the ground over the Yowie. It will be much quicker and easier." Nobody asked the Yowie what he thought of that idea, but rather than hurt their feelings, he kept perfectly still while the wombats got busy with their sharp front claws, shoveling wet earth on top of him. It takes a very long time to bury a Yowie. Kookaburra got thoroughly bored with nothing very much to laugh at, and took himself off to bed. An hour later, when Possum just happened to be passing, there was still quite a lot of Yowie sticking out of the mound that the wombats were furiously working on. "Great galloping goannas!" yelled Possum. "Hold on, mate. We'll soon have you out of there." He took a flying leap onto the mound and began to scrabble away at the mud for all he was worth. "But Possum dear," cried Mrs. Wombat, "we're not trying to get the Yowie out, we're trying to put him in." "Great jumping jumbuck," said Possum when they told him the whole story. "You can't put a Yowie in a hole. You can't bury him either. If you'd only asked me, I'd have told you straight off. The best place for a Yowie is in somebody's roof." "That may be very well for a possum," said Mrs. Wombat, "but people might not want a Yowie in their roof." The Yowie had to agree. One really never knew with people. "Great pink platypuses," cried Possum. "My uncle lived in a roof all his life. The people treated him like one of the family. They even put a dish of milk and sugar out for him every night." "Really?" said the Yowie, so interested that he sat up and ruined his burrow. "I know just the place," said Possum. "A beaut little wooden house down in the valley. I'd thought of moving in there myself, but I don't mind if my old mate the Yowie takes it." The Yowie was so overwhelmed by such generosity he couldn't wait to see the house. "Well, Yowie dear," said Mrs. Wombat, "if you're sure you'll be really happy living in a roof, perhaps Possum should take you there right away. It is getting rather late." She and Wombat were secretly rather relieved that they didn't have to do any more digging. "See you in the spring," called the Yowie happily as he set off down the steep track, with Possum scampering ahead to show the way. It was a long, winding climb down into the valley, and several times the Yowie stepped on his fingers and went tumbling over heels. But he didn't mind. It was good to be going home. When at last they reached the little house nestling amongst some trees, everything was in darkness. "They've all gone to sleep," whispered Possum. "That's good. We'll just sneak you up into the roof, and nobody will be any the wiser." Climbing into the roof was the easiest thing that had happened to the Yowie all day. He climbed up onto a garden bench, which was standing against one of the end walls. Then all he had to do was reach up and gently push in the wooden board that sealed off the end of the roof. "Good luck, old matey," whispered Possum, as the rear end of his friend disappeared through the opening. It was too dark for the Yowie to see very much of his new home. It was perhaps a little cramped, but it was warm and dry and smelt very cosily of sawdust. "Ho hum," he yawned to himself. "Home sweet home." He made a little pillow from his hands, curled himself up, and closed his eyes. He was never quite certain what happened next. The floor beneath him gave a sigh, then it gave a groan, then it just sort of opened up. The Yowie felt himself falling downwards, his arms and legs flapping in all directions. "Yowie!" he cried.